So, my thoughts on American policy towards the genocide, it's abhorrent. The US is undeniably complicit in the war crimes that we've been watching unfold and paying for with US tax dollars, which is very much the US brand. We're complicit in war crimes in many other countries as well, like Vietnam and Iraq. So, besides me morally feeling a certain way about my tax dollars supporting such extreme violence, it is also against national and international humanitarian laws. So I hope that Martin Luther King Jr. is right when he says that the arc of the moral universe is long, but that it does bend towards justice.
I think it's pretty clear to almost anyone with a little bit of knowledge on the subject that American policy is the main thing enabling and encouraging the genocide in Gaza over the course of the past year. Um, they always like to tell us, oh, you should vote for the lesser evil, so on and so forth. But, voting for the lesser evil every single time just results in that becoming more and more evil. The lesser evil of today is more evil than the greater evil of yesterday. Even back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan, who was a famously extremely conservative president, he was still able to call up Israel and threaten, cutting off supplies in order to make them stop bombing Beirut. Um, but it seems like this administration has absolutely zero red lines, no matter what their words, no matter what words they say, no matter what meaningless platitudes they express. There are zero red lines. So yeah, American foreign policy is the prime driver of Zionist genocide of Palestinians in Gaza right now. That's my opinion.
I think it's pretty much what you would expect out of a lobby controlled nation. Obviously, it's too simplistic to attribute this psychopathic level of support to the occupation, to just a lobby. But if you look more deeply into the history of this country, it'll make sense. I never understand the rhetoric of surprise that people use when they approve another $1 billion to be sent overseas, but it's just like listen to the national anthem where the rockets are glaring red and the bombs are bursting. That's where they tell you that you'll find the American flag. So it's very much in line with the history and very much to be expected.
And to answer that question, like Hamza iterated, the lesser of two evils, it's on the same track, and so we've never seen. It's very clear to anyone, again, with little knowledge, that American policy is completely catered towards their interests. Um, by there, I mean America's interest as well as the Israeli interest. Um, and we see a complete, with the recent elections, we see a complete, even more so, like standing on a disregard for Palestinians and Arab Muslim voters as well. Um, and an example of that would be like whenever Kamala is questioned about it, the very first thing that she makes sure to assure the public is that her standing support for Israel. And so that is an example of that. But there is no question that this, after a year of this going on, and after, sorry to be so scattered, but for example, there was that report that came out the other day which um, listed that 70% of the cost of war since October 7th for Israel has been supplied by the US. And so there's no doubt about it that if US's longstanding support for them were to end tomorrow, that it would have major ramifications and effects on the continuation of all of this.
So, the candidates in this presidential election, I've voted Democrat always in presidential elections, although I most closely identify with the politics of someone like Bernie Sanders, who I love and adore. I voted Democrat because, especially over the last few election cycles, I've seen the collapse of the Republican Party and the rise of fascism with support for national religious rule and the stripping of reproductive rights for women. So, aside from the fact that I believe America is great because of the diversity of people that live and work here, which I don't think Trump identifies with, I can't vote for Trump because he also supports the genocide of the Palestinians and wants to stifle campus protesters in the US, like Kamala Harris does too, unfortunately.
In America, general electoral politics, uh, and especially economic policy, has shifted so far right over decades and decades and decades, that the most minute, the most basic left-wing policies, even economically in the U.S., are seen as extremely radical. Back in 2016, when Bernie Sanders ran, he was calling for basic things like universal health care and, just in general better government, social policies. And they called him a communist. He's definitely not a communist. He's a very bare bones social democrat. But, a lot of these policies that we have to fight for so hard in America are commonplace in many countries, and, especially Western Europe. But even today, the Democratic Party, which 8 years ago was advocating apparently for increased healthcare platform, softer on immigration, uh, so on and so forth. Even today, their policies are not too dissimilar from the Republican Party. They're a little better on environmental protections, a little better on, I guess, sometimes with some social policies, but in general, their foreign policy is almost identical. Doesn't they try to be a little nicer about it? At least the Republicans, like the far right party, at least they're a little more honest to our faces about it. They're both parties of capital. They're both fully funded by corporate interests. They both have the same foreign policy. They want to bomb the Middle East even more, and they want to not hold Israel accountable for their crimes in Palestine. And the both of the candidates, their policies on Israel, their policy on Zionism. Well, let's be clear about what Zionism is and what Israel is. It is one giant military outpost for the United States to further their control over the Middle East. They can put all the bases they want there. They can put all the military supplies they want there. They can invest as much money as they want in the tech capital of the Middle East. Both of these candidates, neither of them will be better for Palestinians. Maybe some people have one reason or another to vote for Kamala, who may seem to be slightly progressive. But at the end of the day, when it comes to foreign policy, it doesn't mean much for us. We've seen over the past year how caring for Palestinians is just not politically correct. Palestinian life simply is just not valuable in American eyes. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the main two candidates, Kamala and Trump, uh, I hate both of them, honestly. They're both terrible, and both of them will continue the suffering of Palestinians. When it comes to seemingly the most popular third party option, like Jill Stein with the Green Party, um, I think her foreign policy is much, much better. And I know that it probably won't result in Jill Stein winning the presidential election because third parties just do not happen here in the US. The entire system is made to protect itself against them. It's worth sending a message. And if Harris loses, there'll be more angry people that'll be willing to organize in the streets, to be completely honest. And I think after fully enabling and rewarding Israel for the genocide in Palestine, the Democrats deserve to lose. They honestly do. They ran a horrible candidate, commit to a horribly unpopular policy with Israel, and it's if they lose, it'll be entirely their fault. And honestly, it doesn't bother me much. So I'll be voting third party.
I think it's been very interesting to see the intense debate on them online. I think the debate exists for good reasons. It's actually hard to tell what the correct thing to do is when you have, on one hand, that you know almost for sure that it's going to be either Harris or Trump. And on the other hand, you have people like Jill Stein putting herself out there, upsetting the most powerful lobby in the US and actually trying to create a different legacy for the country. Like, do you reward her with your vote, even though it might increase Trump's chances of winning, or do you just employ like a lesser of two evils approach until things get less evil? So both Trump and Kamala are clearly pro-Israel. The difference really is just that Kamala sandwiches her rare sympathy for Palestinians with an affirmation of her support for the apartheid regime, whereas Trump unapologetically uses the word Palestinian as a slur.
When it comes to my thoughts on the candidates, it kind of goes back to the very first question. It's two sides of the same coin. Um, in in either case, I won't focus too much in term on like domestic policies because in either case, our suffering is like incomparable to the suffering of those in Palestine. And so that's really what I look at when it comes to these candidates. And again, there's a complete disregard on both sides. And, you have one side, for example, calling the other candidate a bad Palestinian, and you have another person who makes sure to completely disregard them and go the extra mile to reassure her donors of, her support for Israel. And so I likewise echo the sentiment that I'd be voting for Jill Stein. And of course, it's not that we see any possibility or any chance of her winning, but it's to change the narrative on 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 AIPAC's invulnerability and why the Democrats deserve to lose, and that this is a topic that can't go by unpunishable.
Who I will be voting for. I cannot vote for Trump, and unfortunately, I cannot vote for Harris because I've become a single issue voter on the Israel Palestine issue. And in general, I believe she has catered too much to the right, making the Democratic Party one that I don't recognize or support anymore. And I wish, as a Palestinian, that she would give me a crumb of some genuine hope that she cares to save Palestinian lives. And I've waited, and she won't. I haven't seen that from her, so I can't vote for her. But I also don't believe in not voting. So, although I don't think she's a very serious candidate, and of course I don't believe she would win the election this year, I will be voting for Jill Stein because my values most closely align with the Green Party, and she has shown great, sincere support to the Arab community in Michigan, and I really care about my Arab community in Michigan. I feel like I can use my vote as a message to our politicians that you must care about Arab voters to get our vote, or at least pretend to. And if Arabs don't draw the line at genocide, where could we ever draw it? If we concede with our vote on this because we need to vote the lesser of the two evils one more time, they keep saying just one more time, it's so important, just vote the lesser of the two evils. How can we be taken seriously as voters? And what incentive are politicians given to work with Arab Americans and to actually listen to us? So that's why I feel my vote this year is especially important.
So, first and foremost, Palestine will not be freed by the ballot box. Palestine will not be freed by anyone in the White House. What progresses the journey and the struggle for liberation is Palestinians in Palestine. Let's be clear. We may live in the West, we live in the belly of the beast, but we are not the main characters. The main characters are the Palestinians in Palestine resisting through militant and even civil means. Um, doesn't matter who we vote for when when both presidential candidates have declared wholehearted support for Israel. Uh, Palestine will not be freed by electoral politics, and I don't rely on electoral politics to bring change for Palestine. I'll be voting third party, and like we might have said earlier, the point of voting third party, the very least, to send a message to the Democratic establishment. This is how badly you messed up. This is how many people you lost because your foreign policy is so bad. If a presidential candidate loses for the first time in history, for one of the main reasons being Palestine, that would be a historical moment in America. And I think we really are living in a radical time where the narrative is shifting, and there's a huge, very visible dissonance between what the masses want and what the ruling class wants. And I'll be voting third party. I'll be voting for Jill Stein, even though I think my own personal politics might be a little more radical than hers. But at the end of the day, I think she has the best chance to get enough numbers to at least make a statement during the election.
I think voting for Jill is more in line with the spirit of sort of like reclaiming your power that's been present globally since October of last year. So if I hadn't missed the deadline for the absentee ballot, I definitely would be voting for her.
And to answer this question, I follow the strategy in that for voting for Jill Stein, it's not about necessarily taking votes away from the Democrats or to say that I would have voted Democrat beforehand, but that I like the idea of the invulnerability of AIPAC to fall, right? Because we see them constantly bragging about their elections, like 99 elections run, 99 elections won, right? And when it comes to an example, the prime example we can look at, for example, is like Jamal Bowman, right? Who was a Democrat and AIPAC is of course bipartisan. They don't care what party they're going to support both, as long as it. And for the politicians, their support from AIPAC means political success. And so to vote for Jill Stein, for me at least, means that voting for Jill Stein, right, and having these mass amount of people who otherwise would have voted for either party vote that direction, like Hamza said, is symbolic in and of its own, right, and deserves a statement. And when Hillary Clinton lost, at that time Jill Stein had run too, and a statement that she had come out and said was that she had blamed some of her loss to Jill Stein, right? And that's enough. Like, and then there wasn't the amount of attention that we have on Gaza, Palestine, and elections in general. And so even a statement like that today would have the chance to really, I believe, inspire a serious reflection within the Democratic Party, right? That even when they lose this one, right, if Gaza be the reason that they lose, it's going to have to inspire this reflection within themselves and ask questions and consider their support for AIPAC. And so I view it as a chance for AIPAC's invulnerability to falter, to fail. And then, coming the 2 years after that, when it comes to primaries, their strategy might be a lot more different. And we might see, or we will see for sure, a change in their direction. So to echo again, I'd be voting for Jill Stein.